South Africa, a world in one country. Its size is breathtaking. It's a country that has a rich and remarkable flora. With over 22,000 species of flowering plants, it's unmatched in terms of its diversity by any equal-sized area of the earth. The plants are of great beauty and unique horticultural potential, qualities that have until recently been taken for granted by many South Africans, but long recognised overseas. Its gardens reflect a mixture of influences and a wide range of designs, and the varied climates and conditions make them quite simply some of the most beautiful anywhere in the world. It's a country of unparalleled floral riches, proteas and leucadendrons growing amid stunning scenery. But this isn't South Africa. This is the Chelsea Flower Show, where these flowers appear every year, tempting British gardeners to take the garden route. Our garden route starts in the city of Johannesburg and the Oppenheimers' estate at Brenthurst. This is one of the few great houses built for the Transvaal's mining magnates at the turn of the century to survive in its original setting. Its gardens are not only intact, but matured and developed. Its history is inextricably bound up with the history of mining on the reef from the earliest days. Sir Herbert Baker's dramatic Cape Gables contrast with a Transvaal copy, and are set amid formal, informal and wild gardens. The garden is a testimony to the hard work and dedication of estate manager Dick Scott and his team.
Through years of experience, we obviously do work with very, very strong planting plans in that one tries to get a colour flow. Try to work with colours and combinations that will blend with each other and complement each other and even at times contrast with each other. But there has to be a kind of idea of things looking as if it could actually happen. Spring is one of the exceptions where sometimes we use a lot more colour in spring than I do in summer. In summer we do tone the colour down quite a lot, although there is always colour. But in spring I just think after winter, spring is so important to have that wonderful colour to just wake you up and make you realise, wow, it's here, spring is sprung. To me, the whole thing is that it's a garden with the most incredible spirit. It's got its own unbelievable heartbeat. Every garden has got its own spirit, I think. It doesn't matter which garden you go into, every garden is different, although we're all using the same material. But the spirit of this garden is unbelievable. It is just awesome. And it's a kind of spirit that never ever allows you to take it for granted. It's a wonderful, soothing, harmonious feeling in a garden like this. I've been to gardens that are very bright and very, very colourful, and sometimes they're so bright and colourful that you actually feel a bit punch-drunk when you come out. Whereas this garden, even though there's incredible colour display, somehow there's enough power in the garden to be able to keep it gentle.
And what could be more gentle and relaxing than the sound of water? Lady Oppenheimer inspired by a visit to Japan in the 60s, created a Japanese feel around this ancient oak water wheel. It's only one small section of the garden. Around every corner and down every pathway, there's much to delight and surprise. Although not generally open to the public, this oasis of calm and tranquility amid the rush and bustle of Johannesburg can be seen by special appointment. It's well worth a visit. Brenthurst is quite simply one of the most stunning gardens in the whole country. South African plants are revered the world over for their intricate beauty and tremendous variety, but in the native country it's only recently that their value has been fully appreciated. Gardening here drew on English and Eastern influences. It fell to Bea Thompson, the grande dame of South African gardening, to set a new trend. She broke away from the popular formal, stylised types of gardens to use indigenous plants in a more natural setting.
I think it's a case of preserving nature and everything for us. All things are interrelated. Insects, birds, pests, if you like. And by growing the trees, you produce the fruits for the birds, the seeds for the birds, and then the birds then feed on the insects, so they've got food. The insects pollinate the plants, so that you maintain nature as it was meant to be.
The beetle daisy, Gaultheria diffusa, specially adapted to attract the monkey beetle which pollinates it. And grown from Bea's seed, this Acacia xanthophylla, the fever tree, so called because it usually grows in areas where malaria is a problem. Here, the birds eat the young shoots that are rich in protein.
People didn't know anything about indigenous things. It was all roses and all those pansies and things like that, you know. Once upon a time, they didn't know what an indigenous plant was.
Bea has had a considerable influence on modern gardening in South Africa. People have learnt from her. Here, the garden came first and the house second. Cynthia and Gavin Turner have set their home into the hillside to blend with existing natural vegetation. Stones have been moved and corners angled to fit into the existing contours. The immaculately kept garden has been enriched by indigenous plantings, which make it a haven for wildlife. Every window of the house offers views of a different aspect of the garden. It creates a feeling of unity between house and garden. This is no monstrous carbuncle, but modern architecture in sympathy and in tune with its surroundings. Another natural-style garden is that belonging to Richard and Hanneke Jameson in Cape Town. The garden has grown with them. It's a family garden. As the children grew, so too did the garden. They were each given their own pond. This tiny suburban patch is now crammed with rich and rare plants in a variety of settings, making compartments or rooms within the garden. Growing conditions in Cape Town are more extreme than in Johannesburg. Strong winds are a problem. so the trees and largest shrubs were planted first to give shelter and help create the garden's own microclimate, ideal for this small piece of urban jungle. These proteas and ferns belong to Rod and Rachel Saunders, who collect seed from all over the country to distribute worldwide. Their garden echoes the diversity of South Africa's indigenous plants. At first sight, this garden may not look typically African. It's more like an English country estate, with its field of white primulas and daffodils chasing the spring sunshine. But it belongs to television gardener Keith Kirsten, a man who's been an important influence in bringing gardening to the masses in South Africa.
Well, first of all, it was the biggest garden that I'd ever tackled, and I tried to create an open landscape, woodland. I'm not a person into fussy beds, so having inherited these lovely big trees, I decided to create big borders connecting up the large trees, and then plant a lot of shrubbery, perennials and ground covers between them, with just little areas for colour. So I have started through a series of things in the garden to try and Africanize my garden, starting with the swimming pool, and we remodeled the swimming pool from that egg shape to a natural looking pool with a water cascade, natural rocks around the edges, and black marbleite as opposed to white marbleite, which just reflects the blue pool. And we've planted a number of indigenous plants around it, even though the garden is full of a number of exotics as well. And I'm trying to achieve about 50% indigenous plants in the garden, with 50% exotic at least, to Africanize the garden. And I have put in a thatched gazebo as opposed to perhaps a brookie lace or a colonial-styled pavilion, and lots of gravel, which was inspired by John Brooks and his many visits to South Africa, where he's tried to get us to realize that we've got such a wonderful wealth of indigenous plant material to use, from the thorn trees that the birds love to nest in, to the great giant strelitzias or wild bananas, and then to utilize these plants more. And I've also brought in African pots, clay pots, big ones and small ones, along with the gravel, to simply try and achieve that effect, as opposed to having an Italianate garden or an English garden. We can grow such a broad range of plant material, from our South African native plants to the Mediterranean, to the Australian, American, and all the European plant material. So we end up with fruit salad gardens if we're not careful.
Only a few kilometres away, as the eagle flies, is Witwatersrand Botanic Garden. As well as being the home of this rare black eagle, it has a botanic garden that grows only indigenous plants. It's set amid towering cliffs and in the shadow of its famous 70-foot Vidportier waterfall.
Perhaps one of the highlights of the garden would be the waterfall, which really forms a lovely centrepiece and a backdrop to the rest of the garden, along with the magnificent shale and quartzite cliffs that run next to the waterfall. So that's a really lovely setting. This garden is very young still, and it's still in its developing stages. It's only been around for 14 years, and we're looking at developing a medicinal plant garden, plants that are used by perhaps the tribal people of the country for muti and for various other things, as well as the early colonial settlers. And then one of the exciting sections that we're doing is a wildflower section, where we are enriching a piece of natural veld area with local wildflowers that don't necessarily occur on our property. Being so close to Johannesburg and so much development and housing around us, we're losing a lot of that natural grassland, and we often rescue plants from those areas and bring them into that section. So that's something that's quite exciting and will develop over the years.
Witwatersrand is a young and developing garden which originated in 1982, created with education and conservation in mind. In an area of outstanding beauty, it preserves a natural environment which is gradually diminishing under the rapidly growing urbanisation around Johannesburg.
We also have a lovely succulent garden, which in winter is really lovely as the aloes are all flowering, and it's a lovely place for the sunbirds. Plant-wise, other than that, we have a water garden with bog and marsh plants. We're also developing an arboretum. We're trying to create a botanical garden that is more than just a park for people to come through, that they'll leave with some knowledge of South African plants and the importance of the conservation of them.
Some of the rarest plants are the cycads. Cycads have been pushed to the brink of extinction. Many have been stolen to meet the demands of collectors impatient for mature plants. All of these plants have been confiscated by customs from illegal plant dealers and now flourish safely here in Witwatersrand. If you want to see cycads growing in the wild, there's only one place left on the planet, the Mojaji Cycad Forest in the far northern Transvaal. Cycads are the most primitive living seed-bearing plants known. They're remnants of a type of plant that flourished when dinosaurs trod the earth in the Carboniferous period 50 to 60 million years ago, and they've changed little since then. Gymnosperms bear naked seeds. They're cone-bearing. The seeds are believed to be poisonous, but the pith of the stem is rich in starch and has been traditionally used to make a type of bread. The Mojaji cycads are among the largest in the world, and the existence of the forest is due to the fact that it's held to be sacred to the Rain Queen, and hence untouchable. Some of these cycads are several thousand years old. They're shallow rooting, and older stems may recline with basal suckering taking place, which ultimately results in multi-trunked rootstocks. Cycads are normally wind-pollinated. The cones ultimately disintegrate, and pollinated seed falls to the ground, but nature conservation staff have started to raise plants in nurseries by removing some of the top scales from the female cones and hand-pollinating them, so that controlled numbers of cycads are legally available to the public. They ensure the survival of this living fossil. The Mount Sheba Nature Reserve is situated in the northeastern extension of the Drakensberg mountain range and is one of the last remaining large stands of Drakensberg forest. The indigenous forest you see today has remained unchanged for hundreds of years. The clarity of the air makes this area famous for its lush vegetation. Due to continuing conservation, many rare and interesting trees can be found in the forest. Among them, the lemon-scented knobthorn, Xantha xylon davii, with its distinctive bark. And yellow woods, some of them 1,000 years old. Marco's Mantle is a spectacular waterfall deep in the forest, which is famous botanically for the richness of its ferns and mosses. It's interesting to observe these as you follow sparkling streams down the rocky gorges. Many familiar plants can be found growing and seeding in their natural habitats on rocks and beside streams. The Streptocarpus growing here on rocks have adapted to lack of water by dieback in their leaves, a natural way to conserve moisture in times of drought. Impatiens, or busy lizzies, grow wild by the stream. Before the turn of the century, the Pilgrim's Rest area in which the Mount Sheba Nature Reserve lies was a mecca for prospectors and miners attracted to the region in search of gold. They cut the first roads across the nature reserve in the 1880s, trails that are followed today by plant lovers keen to learn about this unique vegetation and to marvel at the spectacular scenery which is Mount Sheba. Education is high on the agenda at the Durban Botanic Garden. Special trips and visits are arranged for local schools to pass on knowledge to the next generation of South African gardeners. It's a popular place to visit for people in the nearby city and those further afield who come to see the garden's varied collections of indigenous and exotic plants.
Well, the Durban Botanic Gardens was established in 1849 during the colonial era, and it originally set up as an economic garden. So they did all the practice of all the economic crops, such as mango and arrowroot and coffee and tea and all that. But soon found out that a lot of these crops didn't succumb to the conditions of Durban. And it was only in the late 1800s when John Medley Woods became curator of the gardens that it changed from one of being an economic garden to one of becoming a botanic gardens. We've got major collections of plants. We've got the Orchid House, which is probably one of the most popular places in the gardens. And that was named after Ernest Thorpe, who was the curator before myself. And then we've got a cycad garden where we've tried to group the cycads from around the world into geographic regions. So within South Africa, we've got the Cape Transvaal and cycads all separate. So we've got a Central American section, we've got an Australian section and a Central African section. And then we've got a huge palm collection through the gardens. We've got a bromeliad garden. And then we've just got an assortment of trees and a herb garden, a blind garden. And then just the assortment of trees and shrubs dotted around the garden. So we've just tried to concentrate on having these areas in the gardens with specialized families of plants, so it's easier for people to come along and actually see them and study the material and go get to know about how these plants survive in the natural habitats.
The stately queen palms of the Palm Walk give a sculptural quality to the gardens and emphasise the age and permanence of this peaceful setting. Palms were an important economic crop in South Africa. This is Borassus aethiopum, the Borassus palm. All parts of this versatile tree can be used for many purposes: wood, fibres, food and medicine. From further afield, Washingtonia filifera, a Californian palm. It's fast-growing and needs a sunny situation. An indigenous palm is Jubiopsis caffra, or the Pondo coconut, found on the bank of one river in Africa. A monotypic palm, this one has never set seed. It's quite rare, really. This is very rare. Not the lizard, but the cycad, Encephalatos woodii.
Well, the one plant in particular, which is Encephalatos woodii, which was found in the Ngoya forest in Zululand in 1895 by John Medley Woods. And the unusual thing about this particular cycad is that there's only males left in the world. Now, cycads are dioecious, they have male and female and separate plants, and there's only males left in the world, there's no females, so it can't be reproduced through sexual reproduction. But also, this plant is extinct in the wild. So any plants that are found around the world have originally come from this botanic gardens, and we have the original specimens found in the Ngoya forest in 1895.
Encephalatos woodii, the rarest plant in the world. This Ficus bengalensis, or Indian banyan tree, was planted in 1900. Its sculptured aerial roots make it an impressive sight. The many trees of the Durban Botanic Garden provide a mind-blowing mixture of colour, texture and form. The delicate yellow blossom of Cybistax donaldsmithii, the autumnal tones of Calodendrum capensi, the subtle, mottled hues of the bark of Eucalyptus deglupta. This Aphelia kwanzensis, or pod mahogany, hides a secret. Open one of the large pods and the brilliant coloured seeds lie like precious jewels in a case. This is an area rich in botanic gardens, all worth a visit. The Natal National Botanic Garden has an entrance set in the natural framework of this avenue of plane trees, the largest specimens of their kind in South Africa. Another giant, a Moreton Bay fig from Australia, Ficus macrophylla. Natal's first objective was to obtain, propagate and distribute plants required by settlers for their farms and plantations. Products from the garden helped lay the foundation of the timber industry. In the early 1800s, European settlers perceived Natal as an ideal climate for growing a wide range of plants, and the Botanic Society at nearby Pietermaritzburg was founded in 1872. Fern Valley is also a botanic garden, but privately owned. Its name fittingly suggests images of rippling streams and still pools, bedecked with a multitude of ferns from all over the world, including this Australian tree fern, all set in a magnificent valley. The garden is the creation of Leslie Rigall, who moved to Fern Valley from Portugal, searching for the perfect location for his precious collection. Many of these plants originated in the Far East. There are over 200 species of camellias, and the reticulatas he introduced caused a sensation. They had not been seen before in Africa.
Camellias are oriental, and this one behind me is Chinese. It's one of the classic reticulata camellias, which had been cultivated in China for 1100 years, and nobody in the West ever knew they existed. And as you can see, they're magnificent camellias. This one is called Mutan Cha, which means peony tea. They call all camellia flowers tea flowers because tea is made from a camellia. And this Mutan Cha, Mutan means peony. So it is the camellia with a peony type flower.
Continuing the Eastern theme, Leslie has painstakingly recreated an authentic Japanese garden.
I've been interested in Japanese gardens a long time. One of the big mistakes that people make when they make so-called Japanese gardens is that they don't ensure that all the plants are Japanese. They must be, because it's got to be a Japanese landscape, you see. It's very different from a Western garden. Western gardens are designed to stimulate. Japanese gardens are designed to create a mood of serenity, tranquility, meditation. A Japanese garden is planned from the beginning, and it doesn't change at all, because you see, it's something eternal. This is the effect that you get at a Japanese garden. You get it from the moss and the old ancient rocks and the water. It all gives this atmosphere of something eternal.
In a hidden bower stands this stone, a fitting epitaph to Leslie's creation.
You will not hear my voice again, and yet the falls that fill each tree-reflecting pool will ever be my voice, lest you forget who made this derelict valley beautiful. Those who make gardens never are alone, though time reduces many friends to few. The moving stream that meets a mossy stone still speaks for me as now it speaks to you. The sighing trees, the paeans of praise that fill the air with song from every bird that flies, will sing for me forevermore until the final silence when this planet dies. And hearing this harmonious melody, you share with me my immortality.
It's not just the East that has influenced the gardens of South Africa. Anne MacLeod inherited Yelverton from her mother, a keen gardener who built up this garden over a period of 40 years. Anne has continued this work, and the garden is a delightful mixture of the old and mature, enhanced by new plantings, a true English cottage garden in the heart of South Africa.
Well, I'm very fond of English gardens, and I think a lot of my plants and things reflect that. I started with my mother, who was really my inspiration. She was always very keen on gardening, and most of what you big shrubs you see around here were planted by her. And from that I learnt a lot. It gives me peace, and also it's given a lot of enjoyment to other people, because I have the garden open every year in aid of hospice, and I get a number of visitors on the two weekends that I have it open.
The theme is continued with many shrubs and trees that we grow in England. Blossom drifts from pear trees over 100 years old, and the white flowers of jasmine scent the air. In the foothills of the Utanika Mountains, at the western end of the famous garden route, lies the Wilderness National Park, with its tranquil lakes and lagoons. A feature of the nutrient-poor soils of the Western and Southern Cape are the so-called Blackwater River systems. As you head deeper into the mountains, the landscape becomes more barren. Plants are sparse, struggling against the harsh climate and poor soil. But even in this inhospitable rocky terrain, there are still splashes of colour. Aloe ferox, an indigenous South African succulent, sends up its bright red spires in defiance of the elements. The bleak landscape of the higher mountain regions seems at first devoid of life, but something does grow here and indeed thrives. Fynbos is the name given to the vegetation that cloaks the mountains, the valleys and the coastal plains of South Africa's southern and southwestern Cape, a small botanical region known as the Cape Floral Kingdom. It may be the smallest, but it's also the richest floral kingdom in the world. There are more than 7,300 different plant species found in the Fynbos, an astonishing number for such a small region. More than 70% are endemic to the area and found nowhere else in the world.
Well, Fynbos is an Afrikaans word, and there isn't an English word that, expresses it sufficiently well. So fyn is literally from fine, which means the leaves of most of the Fynbos species are tiny, because that adapts them to the dryness. And everything, when you look at the Fynbos, is sort of fine. And a lot of people just think that it's rather weedy, but when it's in flower, it's magnificent. It's just a question of getting your eye in to be able to say, that's Fynbos. And once you're hooked, it's the color. The color is a kind of a acid green somehow. It's not a dark green, and it's not a bright, clean green. It's a sort of an acidy, yellowy, olivey green. And then when you get the pinks and the purples and the bright yellows and the whites amongst it, it's just something which you don't get anywhere else.
This is Cape Point, which is situated south of Cape Town, and it is in the center of the Cape Floral Kingdom. It's a very rigorous climate for plants. Horticulturally, the area is very important. South Africa's flora is fairly rich, about 23,000 species. Now, 8,500 of those species occupy less than 4% of the South African landmass, and that is the Cape Floral Kingdom, the smallest the most threatened and containing the greatest number of endemic families and species. The plants growing here are not cultivated. They're growing as nature designed them, in their native habitat, with all the struggles. And often to see a tiny little erica growing out of the crevice of a rock, under the harshest of conditions and the wind beating against it, hardly any nutrients, and there it survives and flowers and completes its life cycle in this tiny little rock crab. My heart goes out to it.
Cape Point lies at the tip of the peninsula, an hour's drive from Cape Town, and after Cape Horn, it's the windiest place in the world, but it still supports more than 1,300 plant species. 10 of these occur naturally nowhere else.
As a seedsman and plantsman, there is just so much to learn here. Coming to the Cape, I wasn't born in the Cape. I came originally from the Transvaal in the north and was brought up in the summer rainfall. And I found coming to the Cape a very, very humbling experience. I realized just how little I knew about the flora of South Africa. And I think all human beings need a bit of humility every now and again.
The early settlers who struggled round the Cape made it to the relative safety of Fool's Bay, where Cape Town, in the shadow of Table Mountain, was established to repair and revictual ships on their travels to the Far East. Cape Town is now home to Kirstenbosch, one of the world's greatest botanical gardens. It's one of the first botanic gardens devoted to indigenous plants. 6,000 species of native plants grow in the cultivated garden, while some 900 species flourish in natural areas. Here you can see the great floral treasures of the Cape: proteas and leucadendrons, restios and ericas. Nestling under the towering backdrop of Table Mountain, it's known as the Kew of South Africa, and has a worldwide reputation for its work. It's a hard act to live up to.
We don't necessarily feel that it is as wide as it could be when you consider what some of the other gardens, like Kew itself, are growing. But of course, when you come here, there's such a whole new range of plant material which is you're not familiar with. But we really are spoilt for choice. There's an enormous range of plants, and so therefore we need horticulturists to specialize on specific groups and build up these collections.
One of Kirstenbosch's most famous features is its collection of species of protea, the national plant of South Africa. The main pollinators of proteas are the Cape sugarbirds and sunbirds, attracted by the plant's nectar. Proteas are found in other parts of the world. This is Telopia speciosissima, the waratah from Australia.
the winter months, if you go up into the Protea garden, I think that is the best time to go there. They really look at their peak. You have a whole range of forms of Protea, and of course that's the leucodendron, the leucospermum, and the mimetes, quite a number of genera. And of course we try to grow them in as natural a manner as possible by concentrating all these Proteaceae, members of the Protea family, plus all the other related members of what we call the fynbos. You know, then you'd have the reeds, the grasses, Restionaceae. They all contribute, and they all have a lot of horticultural potential. So it gives you a very natural effect.
At first glance, Restios or reeds may not appear beautiful, but their beauty comes on closer inspection. Their delicate forms and shapes, glittering in the sunshine, have a strange ethereal beauty of their own. From July to September, mass displays of spring flowers are among the glories of Kirstenbosch. But the weather around Table Mountain can be variable, and as the cloud sweeps in over the vast cliffs, it becomes a challenging environment with no room for complacency.
I like to think that Kirstenbosch is the best time is any time throughout the year. There's always something to offer, but there's always room for improvement, whether it be in the plant collections or the standard of our displays and maintenance. And I think we have a lot to offer in as much as the uniqueness of the plant material which we work with and make available. We try to make as much of it available as possible. We try to promote the flora, which generally other botanic gardens, they don't have that approach. But we feel that's important. That's one of our objectives. And of course, being able to provide education and offer a facility for people to be able to come and learn about our plants.
An hour's drive away from Kirstenbosch lies Vergelegen, famous as a wine-growing estate. Much of the garden we see today was created in the 1900s by Lady Florence Phillips, who transformed the octagonal garden into something typically English, with its magnificent herbaceous borders. The present horticulturist is Eric Theron.
When we created this garden, we brought in the annuals and the perennials. So we can have some colour all the year round. It's not a two-season garden. So with the result is we have got this, in each different section of the garden, there are 50 different varieties of plants. We have got 4 sections. And as you can see, at this time of the year, we've got our winter bulbs coming out into flower. You take the anemones, for instance, and everything else that is flowering, our bulbous plants. But as the plants die off, so we replace it with new plants.
But some plants are irreplaceable, like these 5 magnificent Chinese camphor trees planted in the 1700s. They're the oldest living, officially documented specimens on the subcontinent. They were declared a national monument in 1942. Camphor wood was traditionally employed for making moth-proof cabinets and storage chests. Another ancient giant, an oak. This one was planted between 1700 and 1706, during Willem Adriaan van der Stel's ownership. A younger example, this oak was grown from one of the last acorns of King Alfred's oak at Blenheim Palace, and George VI collected its acorns for replanting in Windsor Great Park. The historic core of the garden runs to some 60 hectares, and as well as the famous trees, includes this formal white garden, a perfect place to sit and sample the estate's wines. Just down the coast, the aptly named Sellers Hotel has been restored to its former glory, another place to sip fine wines and admire the gardens. In the woods at the bottom of the estate, bluebells herald the South African spring. In just 6 years, the owner Liz McGrath has managed to create a varied and interesting series of gardens, combining an overriding English theme with native South African plants. She's always loved visiting gardens all over the world, and Sellers reflects that love. Tabora is another estate steeped in history, built on the site of a famous Cape nobleman's mausoleum which was designed by the famous Huguenot Tibor. The top turret has been carefully preserved, and the house was remodelled around it at the turn of the century in the Dutch Baroque revival style.
It's got a very old history. This is one of the first farming areas of land that was given in the Cape after Jan van Riebeeck landed, 1466. Boshoff down the road was the original farm that this land belonged to, and it was subsequently, this area of the farm was subsequently developed as a burial ground for the Van Breda family. So it's very old, and there are many graves here, and the house itself is supposed to be built on the mausoleum tomb site of the sort of patriarch Van Breda. It's set against the sort of incredible eastern buttress of Table Mountain, so it's a very spectacular setting.
In 1776, 4 guardhouses used to overlook this square compound, which was probably used as slaves' quarters. The walls are made from Dutch ballast bricks from ships, and Portuguese coins dating from 1780 have been found within them. It then became an orchard, and many ancient fruit trees remain. Their blossom is a brilliant white against the Cape sky. This is very much a garden which exudes peace. White is the predominant colour, climbing roses, the water hawthorn, and a simple white forget-me-not. And when you're gardening in South Africa, it's not just green fly that you encounter, but green lizards, a chameleon in fact, perfectly camouflaged. Although the house is built around a mausoleum, the garden is very much a garden of life, a place to come and contemplate the very soul of gardening.
I think it speaks of another side of life and of nature than the sort of world we live in today, and I think it's a wonderful pastime. I think one gets a sense of something inner, something that connects almost in a spiritual way with oneself, and I like the garden for that reason. It's like, I'm a Jungian analyst, and we speak about the wilderness outside, but also the wilderness within, and I think gardens are perhaps a bit of cultivated wilderness within ourselves, and I think that's perhaps the best that one can get from it, or that I can get from it.
Nowhere else on earth is the season of spring welcomed by nature with such extravagant exuberance as it is in the wilderness of South Africa's Cape Province. Spring's universal affirmation of life is proclaimed here with unique intensity. Landscapes that at other times of the year remind one of an arid, forbidding moonscape burst into such prodigious and unexpected bloom that they surpass even the highest flights of fancy. For those who are lucky enough to see this extraordinary natural phenomenon, it's an unforgettable experience.
It happens in spring, where we are, is Lido Valley. It doesn't happen every year. It's not something which you can order for the tourists to come and see. I last saw a display like this in the valley in 1986. They've had displays since then, but nothing quite as spectacular, so extensive, going on for kilometre after kilometre. Often you find patches of flowers, but many of the plants in a poor year, nothing comes through and it's completely barren. But in a fair year, a lot of the plants don't flower. But in a good year, everything flowers. Nature pulls out all the stops, and you get these big sheets of colour that you see now. Magnificent. For interest, if you just peg off a square metre and you count the number of species in there, you'll find it amazing. A dozen or so per square metre. Bulbous plants, the annuals, the perennials, there's just so much. I suppose I'm patriotic, but I've never seen anything like this on quite the same scale anywhere in the world. And somewhere in South Africa, every year there is a good floral display, but of course you need local knowledge and where to go. Not always in the same place, and some years it's very good in the one spot and you go back there the next year and there's nothing. You wonder, what was it all about? Did we see flowers here last year? And then you go to another spot where the previous year there was nothing, and then suddenly in spring the whole area is ablaze with colour. To me, this all comes together. This is what it's all about. And in fact, when you garden, you must take a lesson from nature and look at what nature does. So that I think your garden shouldn't be contrived. I know in my own garden I try and copy nature in my humble way and try and create that harmonious whole that nature so creates.
These flowers, buffeted, beaten and scarred by external forces, are symbols of hope and courage. It's quite simply one of the miracles of nature, the blooming of the desert. As you've seen, South Africa really is a place of incomparable botanical riches, whether it's in the open countryside, in large botanic gardens, or in smaller gardens with an English influence. And they even influenced the English here at the Chelsea Flower Show, proving that South Africa really is a floral paradise.